Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Moving to a beachside home was my dream. Serenity, ocean breeze, pure freedom. But on day 3, reality knocked hard. A smug HOA president, a ridiculous demand, and a chilling threat. I laughed then. I shouldn't have, because what started as a petty dispute was about to become all-out war. Moving to a beachside home had always been my dream. The idea of waking up to the sound of waves, feeling the salty breeze on my skin, and having a private path leading straight to the shoreline was too perfect to resist. So when I found a house with everything I'd ever wanted, spacious backyard, ocean view, and most importantly privacy, I jumped at the opportunity. I wasn't interested in nosy neighbors or anyone telling me how to live. It was my land, my home, and I planned to enjoy every inch of it in peace. That fantasy lasted exactly 2 days. On the third morning, while I was enjoying my coffee on the porch, I noticed a man striding up my driveway like he owned the place. He was in his late 40s, wearing a polo shirt tucked into khakis, his shoes far too polished for a casual visit. He had that smug confidence of someone who had never heard the word no in his life. Before I could tell him to get lost, he flashed a grin and extended his hand like we were old friends. "Tom, welcome to the neighborhood." His voice dripped with artificial warmth. "I'm Henry Wilkes, president of the Homeowners Association. We need to talk about a little matter regarding your property." I raised an eyebrow, but shook his hand. "I don't recall joining any HOA." Henry laughed, as if I had just made an adorable mistake. "Oh no, you're not a member yet, but you really should be. See, your property has something quite unique." I already didn't like where this was going. "And what would that be?" Henry gestured toward the back of my property, where the small wooden path led to the beach. "That right there." He clasped his hands together. "It's the most convenient access point to the shoreline, and the entire community would greatly benefit from it." I stared at him. "You mean my private property?" Henry nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, and that's why it makes perfect sense for you to open it up. As part of the HOA, you'd be required to allow your fellow neighbors to use the path. It would be a great gesture of community spirit. Plus, the rules state that all beachfront homes should ensure accessibility for everyone." I chuckled, shaking my head. "That's not happening." His smile twitched. "Tom, I don't think you understand. This isn't a request." I stepped forward, closing the space between us, and lowered my voice. "No, Henry, I don't think you understand. My land isn't part of your HOA, and I don't owe you or your community anything. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have coffee to finish." I turned to walk back inside, expecting him to leave, but Henry just stood there for a moment. His forced friendliness disappeared, replaced by something colder. "You might want to reconsider," he muttered. "It's best to be on good terms with the HOA. Otherwise, things might get difficult." I gave him a dry smile. "Are you threatening me?" He laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "Not at all, Tom. Just giving friendly advice." With that, he turned and walked back toward the street, leaving me standing there, gripping my coffee mug a little tighter than before. The interaction should have been nothing, a minor inconvenience. But something in Henry's tone, in the way he said things might get difficult, didn't sit right with me. I shrugged it off. What could an HOA possibly do? The first attack came quietly, like an annoying fly buzzing around my ear, irritating, but nothing serious. At first. A letter arrived in my mailbox the day after my conversation with Henry. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and stamped with the HOA's logo. I rolled my eyes before even opening it. Inside was a notice of property violations listing a series of ridiculous infractions. 1. Your fence exceeds the community height limit. 2. Your landscaping does not meet the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. 3. Your exterior paint color is not HOA approved. I had to laugh. My property wasn't even in their HOA, so their violations were as real as a $3 bill. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash. Let them send as many as they wanted. I wasn't paying attention. But then, things escalated. The next morning, I stepped outside and was greeted by a mountain of trash. Someone had dumped garbage all over my front yard. Empty pizza boxes, plastic bottles, even an old stained mattress. My stomach churned at the stench of rotting food. At first, I thought maybe it was just some drunken teenagers screwing around, But then I noticed something. Neatly folded among the trash was another HOA violation notice. I gritted my teeth. So that's how they wanted to play it. The same day, my water got shut off. When I called the water company, they told me that the HOA had reported a leak on my property, requesting an emergency shutoff for community safety. It took me 3 hours, several angry phone calls, and a personal visit to their office to get my water turned back on. By the end of the week, the real fun began. People started walking through my property like it was a public park. I woke up one morning to find a group of strangers casually strolling across my backyard, towels in hand, as if they were guests at a beach resort. "Excuse me?" I called out, stepping onto the porch. "What the hell are you doing?" A middle-aged woman in a wide-brimmed sun hat gave me a confused look. "Oh, we're just heading to the beach. This is the community access path, isn't it?" I blinked. "Number, this is my private property. You're trespassing." Her mouth twisted in annoyance. "Well, Henry said we could use it." "Of course he did." I took a deep breath, trying to control my temper. "Well, Henry doesn't own this land." "I do. So turn around and find another way." She muttered something under her breath, but obeyed. Others weren't so compliant. Over the next few days, I caught more and more neighbors cutting through my backyard. Some pretended not to hear me when I told them to leave. One guy even had the audacity to set up a folding chair on my deck and start drinking a beer. Enough was enough. I went to the hardware store and bought private property signs, placing them all along the path leading to the beach. The next morning, they were gone. Someone had ripped them out. I replaced them with bigger ones. They vanished, too. I tried putting up a temporary wooden gate. It was smashed to pieces within 24 hours. That was when I knew. This wasn't just harassment. This was a full-blown war. So I did what any sane person would do. I went high-tech. I installed security cameras at every possible angle of my property, front yard, backyard, even the side entrance near the beach path. Motion activated, night vision, all of it linked straight to my phone. If they wanted to play dirty, fine. But I was about to play smarter. The cameras worked almost immediately. Within a day, I had crystal clear footage of my friendly neighbors blatantly trespassing, tearing down my signs, and treating my yard like their personal highway. But the real kicker came 2 nights later. It was around 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I sat up groggily, grabbed my phone, and pulled up the live feed. The grainy black and white image flickered for a second before sharpening into focus. 2 figures in dark clothing were skulking through my backyard. I squinted at the screen. What the hell were they carrying? Then I saw it. Barrels. Metal barrels. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach. No way. I threw on my jeans, grabbed a flashlight, and stormed outside, my adrenaline spiking. As soon as I stepped into the yard, the acrid chemical-like stench hit me. "Hey!" I barked, aiming my flashlight at them. One of them, a thick-necked goon with a buzz cut, jerked his head up, momentarily blinded. The other guy, a wiry, nervous-looking man, froze mid-motion, still gripping the barrel. For a second, nobody moved. Then the wiry guy dropped the barrel, and it hit the ground with a metallic clang. A thin hiss escaped from the lid. I took a step forward. "What the hell are you dumping on my property?" Buzz cut sneered. "Just some community cleanup." I glanced at the barrels. Even in the dim light, I could make out a hazard symbol painted on the side. A skull and crossbones. Oh, hell no. I pulled out my phone, camera rolling. "Start talking, or this footage goes straight to the cops." Wiry guy panicked. "Shit," Henry said. Buzzcut elbowed him hard in the ribs. "Shut up, you idiot." So, Henry was behind this. Of course. I clenched my jaw. "All right, you've got about 3 seconds to get off my property before I call the police." Buzzcut took a step toward me. "Or what? You gonna cry to mommy?" Wrong move. I wasn't in the mood for posturing. When he swung at me, I ducked. He overbalanced, stumbling forward right into the barrel. It tipped over, splattering God knows what toxic sludge all over his pants. He let out a very undignified shriek. Wiry guy turned to run, but I was faster. I kicked out a beach umbrella stand, and he tripped face first into the sand. Buzzcut, still cursing and flailing, tried to wipe the chemical off his legs. It wasn't burning, but the horrified look on his face told me he was convinced it was. I grabbed my phone and held it up. "Smile for the camera, boys." Wiry guy bolted. Buzzcut, still gagging on the fumes, turned and ran after him, stumbling like a man who had just realized he had completely screwed up. As they disappeared into the night, I turned my attention to the barrel. The ground where the sludge had spilled was already turning brown. My plants, my grass, it was all dying instantly. I clenched my fists. That son of a bitch. Henry wasn't just harassing me anymore. He was actively destroying my property. He had officially gone too far, and I was going to bury him for it. By the next morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. Henry thought he was untouchable, that his little HOA fiefdom gave him the power to bully anyone who didn't fall in line. He was wrong. I spent hours reviewing the security footage. The video of the two goons dumping hazardous waste was gold, but it wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to prove not just that Henry was harassing me, but that he was committing serious crimes. I started digging. Henry Wilkes wasn't just the president of the HOA, he was also the owner of a waste disposal company. That immediately set off alarm bells. What the hell was a guy in his position doing dumping barrels in my yard in the middle of the night? After some deeper research, I found an old employee complaint on a local business review site. A guy named Derek Henshaw had left a scathing comment 2 years ago about unsafe disposal practices and management cutting corners at the expense of the environment. That sounded promising. I managed to track Derek down on social media. His profile was mostly inactive, but I sent him a message anyway. To my surprise, he responded within an hour. Derek, who are you and how did you find me? Me. Name's Tom Wayland. I own a property near the beach. Henry's goons just tried dumping hazardous waste on my land. I think we have a mutual enemy. It took a few minutes, but then the typing bubble appeared. Derek, you got proof? Me, plenty. Security footage, timestamps, faces. I just need more on Henry's company. There was a long pause before he replied. Derek, meet me in person, but if I get even a whiff that you're working with Henry, I'm gone. We agreed to meet at a small diner outside town. I arrived first, sitting in a booth where I could see both the entrance and the parking lot. Paranoia? Maybe. But after what Henry pulled, I wasn't taking chances. Derek arrived a few minutes later. He looked like a man who had been through some serious shit. Deep bags under his eyes, fingers tapping nervously against the table. You got a lot of guts reaching out to me, he said, sliding into the booth. You got a lot of guts answering, I shot back. He snorted. Fair point. We cut the small talk. I pulled out my laptop and showed him the footage of the two goons dumping the barrels. His expression darkened as he watched. Jesus, he muttered. He's still doing it. I leaned forward. Tell me everything. Derek sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. I used to work for Henry's company, Wilkes Environmental Services. I was the guy who actually handled disposal contracts. 2 years ago, I noticed we had shipments going missing. Missing, I repeated. Yeah, we'd get orders to dispose of hazardous waste from factories, chemical plants, and even hospitals. The paperwork said we were disposing of it legally, but the numbers didn't add up. Too much waste. Too few official disposal records. I started digging and realized Henry wasn't actually paying for proper disposal. He was just dumping it wherever he could. My stomach turned. And when you confronted him? Derek gave a bitter laugh. I was going to report it. I even had a lawyer lined up. But then my apartment got broken into. My car's brakes mysteriously failed on the highway. I got the message. Henry has friends in the police force. The local sheriff is in his pocket. There was no way I'd win. Shit, I muttered. Derek leaned forward. I still have records, financial statements, altered invoices, proof of the illegal disposals. I kept it all as insurance in case Henry ever came after me. That's exactly what I need, I said. He hesitated, studying me. If I give this to you, I need to know you're actually going to use it. I'm not going through this again just for Henry to walk free. I met his gaze. I don't just want to stop Henry, I want to bury him. After a long pause, Derek nodded. Then let's take this bastard down. The courtroom was packed. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Henry sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of forced confidence. But I could see it, the tightness in his jaw, the slight twitch in his fingers. He was nervous. Good. He damn well should be. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my lawyer beside me, stacks of documents, photographs, and video evidence neatly arranged. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Henry's lawyer, some high-priced, smooth-talking corporate suit, stood up, his voice dripping with manufactured charm. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Wilkes, is a respected businessman and leader of our community. These accusations are baseless and... "Cut the crap," my lawyer, James Caldwell, interrupted, rising to his feet. James was a bulldog in the courtroom, sharp, aggressive, and absolutely ruthless. "We have evidence proving, beyond any doubt, that Henry Wilkes and his company have been illegally dumping hazardous waste, intimidating residents, and using his HOA as a front for his personal criminal activities." Henry shot up from his seat. "That's a damn lie." The judge banged the gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Wilkes." Henry clenched his jaw and slowly lowered himself back into his chair, but his face was turning red. His cool demeanor was already starting to crack. James continued, stepping forward with calculated ease. "Let's start with the footage." He gestured toward the screen at the front of the courtroom. The video played. The whole room watched as Henry's two goons appeared on screen, dragging barrels onto my property, sloppily dropping them in the dirt. The audio was crystal clear. Henry said, "Shut up, you idiot." The room murmured. Henry's lawyer paled. Henry himself went stone still. James didn't stop. "And here's where it gets really interesting, Your Honor." He walked over to our table and picked up a stack of documents, financial records, falsified disposal forms, invoices that showed Henry's company was getting paid for proper waste removal, but never actually following through. James held up a folder. These records were provided by someone who worked for Mr. Wilkes, someone who saw firsthand what was happening, someone who was silenced with threats. He turned. "Mr. Derek Henshaw, would you please take the stand?" A horrible, strangled noise came from Henry's throat. He jerked around in his seat, eyes widening in disbelief. His face twisted from shock to rage in seconds. And then he lost it. Henry lunged from his chair, knocking it over. "You son of a bitch!" Before anyone could react, he charged straight at Derek. His face was contorted with rage, eyes wild. Derek barely had time to register what was happening before Henry tackled him, slamming him against the witness stand. Gasps erupted in the courtroom. The judge slammed the gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" But Henry wasn't listening. His hands were wrapped around Derek's collar, shaking him violently. "You backstabbing little shit! I made you! I gave you a job!" Derek struggled, but Henry was too furious, too unhinged. The bailiffs finally rushed forward, grabbing Henry and pulling him away. He fought them, his face red, veins bulging, screaming like a madman. I stood up watching it unfold, my heart pounding, not in fear, but in pure, savage satisfaction. Henry had just sealed his fate. "You think you can take me down?" Henry raged, still trying to free himself from the bailiff's grip. His once polished image was shattered. Sweat dripped down his face, his hair disheveled. He looked like a desperate man drowning, clawing at anything to keep himself afloat. "You're finished, Wilkes," I said calmly, meeting his wild, bloodshot eyes. "And you just proved to everyone exactly who you are." The judge's voice boomed across the courtroom. "Mr. Wilkes, you are held in contempt. Bailiffs, remove him from this courtroom immediately." Henry screamed incoherently as they dragged him away. His lawyer just sat there, rubbing his temples like a man who had realized he'd made a very bad career choice. The courtroom buzzed. Everyone had just witnessed Henry Wilkes implode. I turned to Derek, who was straightening his collar, still rattled. "You okay?" He let out a breath. "Yeah, but man, that felt good." I grinned. "It's not over yet, but it will be soon." 3 weeks after Henry's spectacular courtroom meltdown, the news exploded. His company was officially under federal investigation for illegal waste disposal fraud and environmental violations. The local sheriff, his longtime buddy and enforcer, was also being investigated for corruption. And Henry? He was completely screwed. I followed every development like a man watching the final act of a play he had written himself. The media tore Henry apart. "Corrupt HOA president exposed for criminal dumping scheme" was one of my favorite headlines. The local news showed footage of my security recordings, the courtroom assault on Derek, and even old interviews where Henry bragged about being a pillar of the community. Now he was a laughingstock. But the best part? Henry tried to run. 2 days before his formal sentencing hearing, Henry bought a one-way ticket to Mexico. He must have thought he could slip away unnoticed, but the feds were already watching him. At the airport, security footage showed Henry sweating through his expensive suit, looking over his shoulder every few seconds. Then, federal agents appeared. The video of his arrest went viral. He tried to argue, tried to plead, even threw a fit about his rights. But the agents slammed him against a desk, cuffed him, and dragged him through the airport like a sack of garbage. The news played it on repeat. And I watched it with a beer in hand and a satisfied grin. A week later, my lawyer called. "Tom, you'll love this. Henry wants to apologize." I nearly choked on my drink. "Excuse me?" His lawyer requested it. PR stunt, probably. Wants to be seen as remorseful before sentencing. I laughed loudly. "You know what? Fine, let's hear it." They brought Henry to my property, shackled in an orange jumpsuit. His once pristine hair was a mess, his face gaunt and hollow. He looked nothing like the smug, power-drunk HOA dictator who had first shown up demanding my land. He opened his mouth, probably to give some half-assed apology. And then it happened. A seagull, soaring gracefully above, let out a loud, triumphant screech, then dropped a massive glob of bird shit right on Henry's head. Silence. I blinked. Henry froze, his mouth hanging open in pure horror. The splatter dripped down his forehead, onto his nose. Someone, maybe Derek, maybe one of the guards, snorted. Then, I lost it. I laughed so hard I had to grip my knees to stay standing. Henry just stood there, seething, humiliated beyond words. I wiped my eyes, still chuckling. "Henry, this is exactly what you deserve." The guards hauled him back toward the car, his expression twisted in pure misery. As they drove away, Derek nudged me, still grinning. "You know, Tom, sometimes justice just rights itself." I took a deep breath, watching the sun set over my land, the land I had fought for, the land that was still mine. "Yeah," I said, smirking. "It really does." Sitting on my back porch, a cold beer in hand, I watched the waves roll onto the beach, the same private beach I had fought to keep. The salty breeze felt different now, lighter, as if my land had finally rid itself of the toxic stain of Henry Wilkes. The news had just aired Henry's sentencing. 15 years. 15 beautiful, well-earned years behind bars. His corrupt sheriff buddy got 10, and his waste disposal company was completely dismantled. The HOA dissolved. A new neighborhood committee had taken over, but they were keeping their distance from me. Smart choice. I chuckled, taking a sip. What a ride this had been. What started as a petty HOA dispute had turned into a full-blown criminal case. Henry thought he could strong-arm me into giving up my land. Instead, he lost everything. And yet, even after all of that, the universe wasn't quite done with him. That evening, Derek came over and we sat outside by a small fire pit. As we talked, he suddenly pulled out his phone. "Tom," he said, stifling a laugh, "you have got to see this." He handed me the phone and I burst out laughing. The prison mugshot of Henry Wilkes had just been released to the press, and the bird shit stain still visible on his jumpsuit. Damn, I whistled. That thing really stuck with him. Derek grinned. "Yep, looks like karma has a sense of humor." I raised my beer. To karma. We clinked bottles, the fire crackling between us, and for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. Henry was gone, my land was mine, and no HOA would ever mess with me again.